Hi, my name is Jerilyn Olson, Chief People Officer at Great Hearts, and I am delighted today to be able to speak with Dr. Jessica Hooten Wilson, who joins us at the National Symposium for Classical Education and is one of our keynote speakers. Jessica, will you introduce us to yourself?
Yes, absolutely. So I am the Fletcher Jones Chair of Great Books at Pepperdine. It was actually my alma mater, so that's where I did my Great Books education as an undergraduate. And I also have been a teacher for about 20 years. So I've been teaching mostly Great Books, just kind of interdisciplinary, but my PhD is in theology and literature.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Great. And this is your first year at the Great Hearts Symposium, is that right?
It is.
What drew you here?
The big tent. I mean, really, so I have spoken at Society of Classical Learning. I've spoken at the CIRCE conferences. I've done a lot with classical education since about 2005. So I've been around for a long time in classical education. My first teaching job was actually at a classical school, but I love the big tent approach to classical education, bringing everyone together. I mean, it's the reason that I'm also on the classical learning test board. Yeah. I love that this should be for everybody, that there should be no child excluded from classical education and having access to it. And I really feel like that's what Great Hearts does well.
Yeah. So being in classical education, thinking about these things for that long, and having your own 4 children.
That long. Okay, don't make me sound that old, but keep going.
Forever. How have your kids, raising your kids, changed your theoretical views about education or classical education?
I don't know. I don't know if it changed my theoretical views, because I think my first classroom teaching experience was 9-year-olds, and then I taught junior high, and then I taught high school, and I kind of kept growing with my students in some ways. So returning to having kids of my own is just very much going back to the same kind of understanding of education I had when I taught those 9-year-olds, is that I want students to really flourish. I think each one of them is different. I mean, my first class had so many divergent learning abilities, and my kids, having 4 of them, they each are so different, what their talents are, what their drives are. And one of the things that I think classical education does is gives you the freedom to say, we know you're all different. We're not going to make you all conform to one thing, but we're going to say, like, you excel at this and you excel at this, and let's celebrate each other. Yeah. And I love that part of classical education.
Yeah. Well, what is that balance then between kids who may not naturally want to do something, and we say, like, this is the good, right? Come alongside, and being able to honor their individual passions and things like that. How do we balance that?
I think it's a difference between what students want to do and you're asking them to do versus what they're excelling at. So for example, my son does not excel at spelling. I don't say, like, well, you know what, if you don't want to, you never have to learn how to spell. I just celebrate him when he achieves something hard, and I also recognize that when he's really good at math, I'm like, man, you just love that you're so gifted in those areas, and just being able to show him, like, both the hard work it takes to do the things that are more difficult, and celebrating the work, and then also celebrating the gift. So there's just the working and the gifting is constantly playing in the classroom. I also think that we need to realize that students aren't going to want to do the things that are good for them too.
Sure.
So one of my favorite lines from Confessions that I quote all the time is, "To the sick man, the sweetest bread will taste bitter." It's one of my favorite lines, because I think I am sometimes offering this gift and they take it like medicine. But it's still medicine. It's still nourishing and feeding them. I just look forward to the day where they're like, I want that. I'm going to have that again. Like, I can't wait. Yeah. And I've had that happen. I had sorry, this may be a longer answer than you wanted, but I had a student one time who was taking Dante with me, and she was a biology major, and she did not want to do it. And she protested the entire time through, 21 years old. And now I received an email from her almost 10 years later that was like, I am reading Dante in Uganda while I am helping them with clean water supply, because I miss it and I long for it, and it's what's getting me through this hard time in Uganda. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
That's what we want.
Yeah. And there's a period of time, right, where something is unfamiliar to us, we have to work really hard at it, and it feels like work.
Yes.
Right? But if we do our jobs, it's 10, 20 years later where we then work so that we can leisure back into these things that we love.
I agree.
Right?
Yes.
So that makes a lot of sense. So you have been in a lot of conversations at a lot of different conferences about classical education. How is the conversation changing within the world of classical education? And is there a conversation that we're not having enough yet that it's time to start pushing in that direction?
Oh man.
Yeah, bring it out. Bring out the big guns.
I know, right? Do you want my edited opinion or my real
unvarnished
opinion? So I do think that we are trying too hard to decide who's in and who's out. And I do not like that conversation.
Yeah.
The whole point of classical education is to be an invitation to something really good.
Yeah.
That we get to have an open conversation and we're all at the same table. And if you lose that metaphor of feasting at a table and instead you turn education into a weapon to destroy your enemy, then you've lost what it is, right? Like you're getting to decide who's at the table, who's in, who's out, what do they believe, how are they thinking? And that is just not what classical education was meant to be, right? And so I think the questions that we're not asking enough of is like, what is the ultimate end? What is the lasting good that we're passing down? Not how are we going to win a cultural moment, right? Or fight against certain other ways of education, which I don't think is a Big Ten approach. I don't think it's an invitational or hospitable approach. If we're really cultivating virtues, are we cultivating courage, which could be meaning a martyr? Or are we focusing courage in its false form, which means rashly running out and opposing those who oppose you?
Yeah. And I think about the term, right, liberal arts, the arts that are freeing, right? I think about this move that we even had to make from the liberal arts education being for the free man, the one that was already free, right, not the slave, to say, no, these are actually freeing for all people.
Yes.
And so we have to even shift our use of that term.
Oh,
right?
fantastic. So recently I had admissions counselors at Pepperdine and they were saying, okay, so how do you address the question about liberal arts and its usefulness to other people? And I said, well, it depends on who you're talking to. Again, know your audience, right?
Yeah.
So in one sense, if you are talking to someone who comes from not great circumstances, has not ever had advantages, struggles, like I've heard some students are living in their car, right? They don't have homes. When you talk to them about liberal arts, you talk to them in the same way that you like really remember Frederick Douglass, you remember people in the concentration camps. These are the things that will free their souls. And to keep that kind of education from them because you're misperceiving it as elitist or you're treating it utilitarian, you're not understanding what they need. Right? In another sense, you have some of those students, and this happens at Pepperdine, right? Sometimes you have students who have all the money in the world and they are from that place of leisure and they absolutely don't need the liberal arts education. And then you look at them and you say, remember you will die. Right? And if you're going to die, how do you want to live? Is it just to accumulate more? Is it just to have as much indulgence as possible? Or do you want your life to be about something? And that's when liberal arts frees you from these false loves of money and wealth and fame to living a good life with the resources you've been given. So I think you just always have to think about both groups need to get rid of the utilitarian lens and think about freedom, but for different ends in different ways.
And understand the different things that can enslave each of us. Right? And acknowledge that it comes from a lot of different places.
Yes, absolutely.
So last question, who is somebody at our Great Heart schools that we should be reading that we may not have thought about that will expand our thinking right now?
I don't know your curriculum enough,
Fair.
But I'm really into women. I love the women
Tell me about
that need to be in the curriculum. So when I graduated from Pepperdine originally, Mortimer Adler had selected the curriculum and it didn't have any women in it. So I read Jane Austen and that was it. And so then I went and got my first teaching job at Baylor, teaching great text. And one of the requirements was that you teach a woman every semester. And I was like, are you telling me women wrote before Jane Austen?
Where are they?
Had no idea. So that has been a recent journey for me to discover, Saint Teresa of Avila, Julian of Norwich, Marjorie Kemp, Christine de Pizan, Perpetua from the 2nd century. And so one of the things I'm constantly looking for is where are these voices that really were writing, and for whatever reasons, there's multiple reasons, we haven't put them forward. And they're there and they're rich and they're adding to the conversation. We're not tokenizing them. We're not plugging them in just because of their sex. We're saying you added something and we're sorry that we forgot it for so long.
Right.
And now we're listening again.
We're honoring the fullness of that conversation
Yes.
that might be there. So what are some of the things that they add to the conversation that have been important to you?
Oh, fantastic. So Perpetua, for example, is one of the first people to write a story of her life, and she's about to be martyred. And before this point in human history, the people who wrote their lives were great generals and great leaders and great rulers, and those are the people's lives that you read. So here's a woman that's about to die and thinks her life is worth writing because she has become a Christian, and it's given her a dignity that had not been possessed by individuals before. And so she tells her life story, and that becomes the inspiration for Augustine to write Confessions.
Oh, wow.
So he gives all these sermons on Perpetua that was like, look, her life mattered because of God. And so we can imitate her and admire her courage. And then he thinks, well, maybe I should also be writing my story so that you can see what's worth imitating and following. Maybe these stories really matter, right? No matter who's living them, because of this new Christianity that had come forward. It's really fascinating.
So she is the one that we owe a lot to, and one of the greats of our tradition. And so let's listen to who Augustine listened to.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jerilyn.